The lock didn't turn. I stood on the porch of my mother's house on Birchwood Lane, key in my hand, the same key I'd carried since I was 19, and it simply wouldn't fit. Not stuck. Not stiff. Wrong. The brass around the deadbolt was new, still bright, still showing the little scratch marks from the installer's screwdriver. 3 days. My mother had been gone 3 days and someone had already changed the locks. Through the front window I could see my brother Daniel's truck in the driveway. Inside, just past the curtain, boxes were stacked by the door. My boxes. I recognized the faded moving box on top, the one with Mom's albums written in my own handwriting from years ago, the one with my father's old watch tucked inside an envelope taped to the lid. My phone buzzed that morning with a text I'd already read 4 times. Don't come back here. This isn't your house anymore. I knocked anyway. No footsteps. No shifting curtain. Just the quiet hum of a neighborhood that had already decided what kind of daughter I was. An older woman 2 doors down walked her dog past the driveway, slowed, looked at me standing there with my key in my hand, and gave me the kind of look you give someone who has just been publicly erased. Pity mixed with relief that it wasn't happening to her. My name is Claire Mercer. I'm 52 years old, and 3 days after my mother's funeral, my own brother locked me out of the house I grew up in. If you're watching this, you've probably felt something like it. The moment a family decides who you are and stops asking if it's true. Stay with me because this story isn't really about a lock. It's about a piece of paper my brother didn't know existed. If stories like this speak to you, consider subscribing because there's more where this came from. I didn't bang on that door. I didn't call the police. I took one photograph of the new brass lock, sat down in my car and called a number saved under a name my brother had never once heard. Holloway Estate. He thought he was locking me out of an empty house. He didn't know he was locking himself out of the truth. But to understand why that moment didn't break me the way he expected, I need to take you back. Back before the funeral. Back before the lock. Back to the house itself and the 2 children who grew up inside it. We were raised in that same 2-story house outside Columbus, Ohio. Our mother, Eleanor, was a retired schoolteacher, patient with strangers, gentler with her students than she ever managed to be with her own conflicts. Our father, Frank, died 11 years ago of a heart attack in that kitchen, and something in our family rearranged itself around the empty space he left. Daniel, 2 years older than me, moved into the basement apartment to help Mom. I had just taken a job offer in Denver as a structural engineer. In the months that followed, a quiet story took shape and I wasn't in the room to argue with it. Daniel stayed. Claire left. Daniel cared. Claire chose her career. My mother was proud of me, but she was also passive, and in our house, whoever spoke the loudest the most often in the room itself usually won. Daniel was always in the room. I was a voice on a phone. He never married. He never built much of a career. What he did build, slowly, patiently, was control, paying Mom's bills, holding her bank cards, eventually getting his name added to her accounts, to make things easier for her. I called every week. I visited 4 times a year. I sent money whenever she asked. But in my family, distance and absence had become the same word. In our group texts, my updates sat unanswered while Daniel's smallest gesture, a grocery run, a changed light bulb, got 3 reply hearts. In one Christmas photo, I wasn't there in person, so I simply wasn't there in the photo at all. Daniel said I wasn't really there in spirit, and no one corrected him. I spent years trying to earn a place in a story that had already been written without me. What I didn't know yet, what none of us knew yet, was that something had started shifting between my mother and me in her final 2 years. Daniel never noticed it because somewhere along the way he had stopped watching his mother and started watching her money instead. I didn't know it yet, but my mother had started watching him too. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being treated as optional. Not hated. Not attacked. Just optional. Easy to skip. Easy to leave out. I lived inside that exhaustion for years before I had a name for it. I flew in for my mother's 75th birthday. I paid for the entire dinner, 11 people, a private room at the restaurant on High Street she loved, the good wine she never let herself order. Daniel arrived an hour late. He stood up before dessert and gave a toast about always being there for Mom every single day. Nobody mentioned my flight. Nobody mentioned the bill. I sat there with the receipt folded in my purse like evidence of a crime no one was investigating. At a family reunion the following summer, my cousins asked Daniel how Mom's blood pressure was doing because he'd know. I had been on the phone with her hospice nurse the week before, going over medication schedules line by line. No one asked me anything. I had simply stopped being a source of information in my own family. There was a Tuesday I still think about. I'd booked flights and a hotel so I could take Mom to a cardiac specialist in Cleveland, someone better than what was available locally. Daniel called her the night before and told her not to go. "Claire just wants to feel important," he said. My mother, who hated conflict more than she hated almost anything, canceled the appointment rather than sit between us. Around that same time, Daniel took out a home equity line of credit against her house. He told her it was for repairs. I visited a few months later, helped her sort through a drawer of unopened mail, and found a statement showing a balance that didn't match anything I could see in the house. No new roof, no new windows, nothing changed except the number on the page. When I asked Daniel about it, he laughed, not unkindly, the way you laugh at someone who doesn't understand something simple. "You don't get how adults handle money, Claire." My mother grew quieter that year. She started calling me late at night after Daniel had gone down to the basement just to talk. Conversations he never knew happened. It was on one of those calls, her voice low like she was checking the hallway first, that she said something I didn't understand the weight of until much later. "I want to talk to someone about the house, Claire. Not your brother. Someone who'll actually listen to me." I told her okay. I didn't push. I had learned by then not to push. But I remembered that sentence the way you remember a doctor saying, "We should keep an eye on that." Small, easy to set aside, impossible to fully forget. What Daniel never knew, what I never told the family group chat, what I never mentioned at dinner, is that 18 months before my mother died I started flying to Columbus quietly. Sometimes for less than a day. I used vacation time I never logged anywhere visible. I didn't post photos. I didn't tell Daniel I'd been there at all. On those visits, my mother told me things she had never said out loud to anyone. That she suspected the home equity loan was bigger than Daniel admitted. That she'd signed paperwork she didn't remember fully reading. That she was afraid, genuinely afraid, that whatever was left of the house would become a battlefield the moment she was gone. I'm an engineer. I think in systems, in load-bearing structures, in what holds and what gives way under pressure. So I sat with her at the kitchen table and we went through bank statements together month by month. The loan balance had grown twice since the original draw. No renovation anywhere in that house to show for it. She asked me to help her find someone independent. Not the family friend who golfed with Daniel every other Sunday. A real elder law attorney, someone with no loyalty to either of us. I found one. Marcus Halloway, an estate attorney in Columbus who specialized in protecting older clients from exactly the kind of slow, deniable exploitation my mother was describing without quite having the words for it. In that first meeting, just the two of us, Halloway laid out her options. Among them, something called a transfer on death deed. A document that could move the house directly to a named person the moment she died, completely outside of probate, superseding anything written in an older will. My mother listened. She asked careful questions the way she used to grade essays, looking for the weak argument underneath the confident sentence. Then she decided, clearly and deliberately, to record a new deed naming me as the sole beneficiary of the house. Not out of favoritism. Out of fear. Fear that without it, the house would be lost to Daniel's debts, sold out from under all of us before any of us had a say. The deed was signed. Notarized. Recorded with the county within the month. She told exactly 2 people. Me and her younger sister, my Aunt Carol. My mother gave me something my brother couldn't take away with a new lock. She gave me proof, on paper filed with the county, dated and witnessed, sitting quietly in a public record Daniel didn't even know to look for. Marcus Halloway's office wasn't impressive. A narrow brick building near downtown Columbus. A waiting room with 2 leather chairs and a coffee maker that always smelled slightly burnt. But the man behind the desk had a steadiness that I'd been missing my whole adult life. Someone who looked at the situation and called it exactly what it was, without flinching and without drama. "What your brother has been doing," he told me the week after the deed was recorded, "has a name. It's called financial exploitation of an elder. It doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it just looks like a son who's helping." He explained how the transfer on death deed worked in plain terms. It bypassed the will entirely for that one piece of property. Once recorded with the county, it was difficult to contest without proving my mother lacked the capacity to make the decision, or that someone had pressured her into it, and he made sure carefully that neither would be true. He also told me to start keeping copies of everything related to the home equity loan. In case Daniel ever tried to claim the house came with debt I'd be forced to absorb. It was Holloway who first said the sentence I'd repeat to myself many times in the months ahead. Don't fight him at the door. Let the paperwork fight for you. My Aunt Carol became the other half of that steadiness. She was younger than my mother by 4 years, lived 2 hours north, and had her own quiet falling out with Daniel after asking one too many questions about repairs she never actually saw on any visit. Carol believed me about our family long before I'd built a case for it. She didn't need convincing. She'd watched the same pattern from a slight distance for 30 years. She was the witness in the room the day my mother signed the deed. After the funeral, after the locks were changed, I called her from my car outside a coffee shop, my hands still unsteady. Carol was angry in the way I wasn't allowing myself to be yet. He had no right, she said. I told her what Holloway had told me. She went quiet for a moment, then said, "Fine. Then we let the paper do what your mother wanted it to do." It was Carol who mentioned, almost in passing, that Daniel had already called Holloway's office twice that week, agitated, asking about his mother's will. He had no idea the will had been quietly outweighed by something filed 18 months earlier. I remember sitting with that knowledge like a held breath, wondering how long it would take before he found out the truth the hard way. That tension only deepened in the months before she died. My mother was diagnosed with advanced heart failure that spring. The hospital visits became frequent, then constant. Daniel, despite controlling every dollar that moved through her accounts, was inconsistent about actually showing up. When I tried to arrange a part-time home health aide, he blocked it, calling it unnecessary spending of Mom's money that, on paper, was still hers, though he'd long since treated it as his to gatekeep. I started flying him more often, no longer hiding it. The tension between us sharpened into something close to open conflict. "You're swooping in for a payout," he told me once in the hospital hallway, loud enough that a nurse glanced over. In one of her last lucid hospital stays, my mother held my hand and told me she wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of what would happen to the house afterward. "It's already done," she whispered. "With Carol. With Mr. Holloway. Just in case." Then she asked me for one promise, not to fight Daniel publicly. To let the truth do the work when the time came, quietly. She died at home, peacefully, with hospice care, Carol and I both at her bedside. Daniel arrived late, saying he'd been tied up, and within hours was already discussing funeral logistics, and within days who would get which of her belongings. At the funeral, his eulogy was long, warm, and entirely about himself. His sacrifices, his presence, his devotion. My name didn't come up once. Afterward, a family friend touched my arm and said kindly, clumsily, "It's nice that he was always so close to her." I said nothing. I held the knowledge of that deed quietly, like something private, not yet a weapon. 3 days later, while I was still arranging flights home, still writing thank you notes for flowers, still finishing the small paperwork that follows a death, Daniel changed the locks. The next morning I went back. I told myself I just wanted to talk. I parked across the street and saw a moving truck backed into the driveway, its ramp down, 2 men in matching shirts carrying furniture out of the house. My mother's furniture. I recognized the cedar reading chair from the corner of her bedroom before I even got out of the car. By the time I crossed the lawn, a small crowd had gathered the way crowds do on quiet streets. A couple of neighbors, my cousin Patricia, drawn by the noise of a truck where no noise usually belonged. Daniel stood on the porch like he was presiding over something. "This is my house now, Claire," he said loud enough for the driveway to hear. "Mom always wanted me to have it. I was the one who stayed. Daniel. You don't get to show up now and act like you cared." His voice carried easily in the cold morning air. "Estate shopping. That's what this is. You abandoned her for 30 years and now you want to walk in and collect." I asked him quietly for one thing. The cedar jewelry box on the hallway table, the one my mother had specifically told me more than once that she wanted me to have. He picked it up off the porch step, looked at it, looked at me, and set it inside the truck with the rest. "Everything in this house is mine now," he said. "The will is clear." A neighbor I'd known since childhood looked down at her own shoes. Patricia opened her mouth like she might say something, then didn't. Nobody in that yard was going to challenge him. I understood that immediately, the way you understand cold water the second you're in it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't mention the will or what I knew about it. I said only, Okay, Daniel, turned around and walked back to my car, my legs unsteady beneath me in a way no one watching could see. I sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel, not driving anywhere, and called Holloway. My voice broke for the first time in this entire story right there in that car with the moving truck still loading behind me. He doesn't know about the deed yet, does he? Holloway said. Not really a question. No. There was a pause on the line, brief and deliberate. Then come into the office. Let's make sure he hears it the right way. That phone call became the turning point. Back at my hotel that evening, I called Holloway's office formally, not just as a niece calling a family friend, but as a client asking for the next step. He confirmed in plain language what I already half knew. The transfer on death deed had been properly recorded 18 months earlier with the Franklin County Recorder's Office. It was a public record. It legally superseded any will language concerning that specific property. The house had passed to me automatically outside of probate the moment our mother died. Whatever the old will said about Daniel inheriting the property, it had no power over real estate already transferred by a valid, recorded deed. So the will doesn't matter, I said. Not for the house, Holloway said. It might matter for other things. It doesn't matter for that. He laid out the path forward. Not a confrontation at the house, which could spiral into a trespassing complaint or worse, but a formal meeting. He would contact Daniel directly, attorney to client's family, and request a sit-down to discuss the disposition of the property. He would bring the recorded deed itself. I had a choice. I could mail Daniel a copy and never see his face when he read it. Or I could be in the room. Carol, when I called her, was the one who pushed me gently toward the second option. Not for revenge, she said. So you can finally stop being the villain in a story he made up about you. I agreed. Holloway scheduled the meeting for the following week, framing it to Daniel only as finalizing your mother's estate matters. Enough to bring him in believing he was about to be confirmed as the rightful owner. I spent that week differently than I expected. I didn't draft arguments. I didn't rehearse anything sharp to say. I reread old texts from my mother. I sat with her voice in my memory. I thought mostly about what kind of person I wanted to be in that room. Not the version of me Daniel had spent 30 years describing, but the one my mother had finally, quietly put on paper. Holloway's conference room had one window, a long table, and a pitcher of water no one ever touched. Daniel walked in 5 minutes late the way he always did, wearing the kind of confidence that comes from believing a meeting has already gone your way before it starts. He told a friend apparently that he was settling Mom's estate. He nodded at me, almost gracious, like a man about to be generous in victory. Carol and I were already seated. Holloway sat at the head of the table with a folder closed in front of him. Thanks for coming, Daniel, Holloway said. Before we get into the will, there's something more recent we need to look at first. Daniel's smile didn't move yet. More recent than the will? Holloway opened the folder and set a single document on the table, turning it so it faced Daniel. The county recorder's stamp sat in the corner, dated official. Below it a notary seal. Below that a witness signature, Carol's name, written in her own steady hand. This is a transfer on death deed, Holloway said. Your mother executed it 18 months ago. It transfers the property at Birchwood Lane directly to Claire, effective on your mother's death outside of probate. It supersedes the will on this specific asset. He read the language aloud, calm and unhurried. Eleanor Mercer, of sound mind, transferring all rights, title and interest in the property to her daughter, in consideration of her daughter's care, honesty and protection of my interests during my lifetime. I watched my brother's face move through 3 distinct stages. Confusion. Disbelief. Then something tightening behind his eyes that I recognized because I'd felt it myself many times in that very family. She wouldn't do this without telling me, he said. Claire put her up to this. This has to be fraudulent. She met with me alone initially, Holloway said evenly. She was assessed for capacity. This was her decision made independently, partly because of documented concerns about a home equity loan drawn against this property without full transparency. Daniel went still. He knew exactly what that meant. Carol spoke then for the first time since he'd walked in. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room anyway. I was there, Daniel. I watched her sign it. She told me herself she was afraid of losing that house to your debts. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I didn't fight you for this house, Daniel, I said. Mom did. Because she finally saw what I'd been seeing for years. He tried once more. Something about occupancy, about being the one who lived there, the one who stayed. Holloway told him plainly that none of that overrides a properly recorded deed, and that challenging it in court would be expensive and would very likely fail. His anger didn't explode. It just folded inward, quiet and humiliated, in front of the two people whose opinion of him still mattered. I stood. I'll give you reasonable time to get your things out. But everything that belonged to Mom comes back to me first. I didn't wait for an answer. I walked out of that office and didn't look back once. Word travels through families the way water finds the lowest point. Patricia called Carol within days asking what had really happened, and Carol told her plainly without exaggeration what the deed showed and why our mother had signed it. The story Daniel had spent decades building began quietly to crack. Relatives who'd once praised him for staying started asking carefully where the home equity money had actually gone, since no renovation had ever appeared. Daniel tried another attorney. He was told the same thing Holloway had already explained. Recorded deeds in Ohio are difficult to overturn without proof of incapacity or undue influence, and between Carol's witness account and our mother's own prior complaints he had neither. Litigation would cost him money he didn't have, against an outcome he likely wouldn't win. The home equity balance, meanwhile, was still his to pay with no house left to leverage against once he moved out. A debt of his own making, not mine. I didn't call relatives to explain my side. I didn't post anything. I let the documents and his own reaction to them speak for themselves, exactly the way Holloway had told me they would. Carol gently corrected misinformation when it surfaced, but never turned it into a weapon. Then one evening my phone buzzed with a final message from Daniel, short, sharp, threatening that I would regret this. After that, silence. Weeks of it. I didn't know yet whether that silence meant he was done, or simply reloading. A month after the reading, my phone rang with Daniel's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer. His voice was different, softer, careful, the tone of a man recalculating. He said he'd been under a lot of stress. That he didn't mean what he said the day the truck was loaded in the driveway. Then came the real reason for the call. Maybe we split it, he said, if you ever sell. That'd be fair, right? Between siblings. I recognized it instantly. Not remorse. Renegotiation. I'm not splitting anything, Daniel, I said, calm without anger in my voice. Mom made that decision. I'm going to honor it the way she wanted it honored. I'll give you a clear deadline to get the rest of your things out respectfully. That's what I can offer. He tried guilt next. Mom would be devastated to see us like this. Mom saw us exactly like this for years, I said. That's why she made the decision she made. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list every grievance from 30 years. I simply ended the call with clarity instead of cruelty, and something in my chest loosened the moment I set the phone down. A few days later, one more message came through, smaller, plainer, almost human. He asked if he could keep Dad's old toolbox. No leverage in it. Just grief wearing a simple request. I said yes. I understood finally the difference between malice and loss, and I didn't need to punish him for the second one. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peace, the absence of a role I had spent decades trying to outrun. Several months later, I stood in the kitchen on Birchwood Lane, the house fully, legally mine, sunlight coming through the same window it always had. I didn't sell it. I brought the cedar reading chair and the jewelry box back, set them exactly where my mother always kept them, and slowly the house stopped feeling like a battlefield and started feeling like hers again, which meant eventually like mine. Carol and I grew close in a way I never expected. We spent weekends restoring the garden Mom used to keep, our hands in the same dirt she'd once knelt in. Carol became the family I didn't fully have growing up, not a replacement, just a continuation of something my mother had started. I think often about what it means that I spent 30 years believing I was the convenient one, the optional one, while my mother, quietly, without ever saying it aloud while she was alive, was building proof that she'd seen the truth the whole time. I don't carry this as revenge against my brother. I carry it as a return to a relationship his version of our family had tried to erase. Daniel moved into a small apartment across town. We speak occasionally now, polite, distant, without warmth. I've made peace with that. Not every relationship needs repair. Some only need honesty. In the evenings I sit in my mother's chair as the light changes outside the window. The deed sits framed in a drawer nearby, not displayed like a trophy, just kept, proof I no longer need to show anyone. If this story reminded you of your own family, I hope you'll share it in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, consider subscribing because there are more truths still waiting to be told. My brother thought changing a lock would decide who my mother loved. But love isn't decided at a door. It's decided long before, in quiet rooms with quiet decisions, by people who finally tell the truth on paper when they can't say it out loud. My mother told hers. And for the first time in my life I believed her completely.